The beginning of the book of Genesis unfolds for us three creation narratives, three attempts to unfold the mystery of God's creation. Which one's right and which one is wrong? None of them. They're all right. They're all right. Because they speak to us of the immensity of this love that is within God that cannot be contained. His existence, by its very nature, he seems not to be able to hold back. He looks at the void wherein he lives, and he draws from this void light. He draws from this disorder order. He brings forth over the earth the creatures and the sea monsters. And as the crown of creation, he brings forth man. He brings forth human beings. And as each animal is presented to the man, it seems like it's not enough. And God places man in a deep sleep. And from this sleep, he draws forth woman. Bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, and equal. And equal. And now God says, this one at last, is the companion I sought. And the sacred author unfolds for us this mystery, that out of this love comes this communion, comes this union between man and woman that we call marriage. And the author declares to us that this is why a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two of them become one flesh. This union is a manifestation of the unity of God. This union between man and woman is the apex of creation. This union between man and woman is the manifestation of the mystery of Christ and his church. The Pharisees in Mark's gospel seek to trap Jesus. There were two great rabbis at this time, Hillel and Shammai, in and about Jerusalem. And there was a great debate about the issue of divorce. And they tried to draw Jesus into this issue. And they asked him, is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife? And Jesus says to them, Moses wrote this commandment for you because of your stubbornness. The Greek says stubbornness. The English translation says hardness of your hearts. And he says to them, but what God has joined, no human being must separate. Back when Noah went on to the ark with the old liturgy, there was a instruction at marriage. Back when we didn't have homilies, we had an instruction for sacraments. And in the instruction for the sacrament of marriage, whether it was at a mass or not, the instruction began and was directed to the couple, and the couple alone. And the instruction said to them, you are about to enter a union that is most sacred and most serious. A union established by God Himself. This is what marriage is. It is a holy union. It is a sacred union. A union established by God Himself. Do we think about that? Do we think about marriage in those terms? Do we think about any of our vocations in those terms? Of what God has called us to? It's fascinating to sit down with couples today and to see in them the mystery of God's love, to see in them an overwhelming joy at the union that they are about to enter, and to see in them a desire to have God be a part of that marriage. We all are very much aware of how marriage has been over-secularized over the years. I can remember reading the New York Times years ago and always would look at the section in the style of the number of marriages. And you used to be able to see that so-and-so were married at St. Patrick's Cathedral, so-and-so were married at St. Ignatius, so-and-so were married here, so were married at this church, that synagogue. Now people are married at event spaces. This morning in the New York Times, there is one couple in four pages that was married in a Catholic church. Our society as a whole has become over-secularized. And maybe many of the ills that we face in our day and age come at the hand of that secularization. For those who are married and who have lived faithful married lives for years, you are an example to us of fidelity. You are an example to us of the fidelity of God, and it's not always easy. In case you don't know it, I grew up in a family. And day in and day out saw those struggles. But the one thing I saw most clearly with my own parents, God rest them, in the middle of my dad working 2 jobs and my mom working shift work, and oftentimes those shifts not intersecting, you saw the immensity of that love in the midst of that struggle. In the good times and the bad times. There was something that bound them. And I remember after my mother died, I said to my dad, I said, what is it like now? And they were both severely independent people, severely independent. And he said, it's different. I thought, that's odd. Different. Of course it's different. I said, different how? And he said, now for the first time, he said, I truly have your mother fully in my heart. For years she was at my side, and I at hers. But now, even in the midst of death, that love is more intense. That love is more intense. There was a dear friend of both of them who I always thought was after my father. And he finally said something to me about it. And I said, what are you going to tell her? He said, I don't know, but she's chasing me pretty bad. I said, well, Dad, I think in fairness, you need to say something to her. And he called me up, he said, and I talked to this woman tonight. I said, what'd you tell her? He said, although I liked her, I could never love her as much as I loved your mother. And it was unfair for her to think that that was a possibility. And their love was rooted in the faith, solidly rooted in the faith. And no matter our vocation in life, our lives have to be rooted in that faith, because otherwise they fall apart. Otherwise they fall apart. We pray today for all couples and all families, for those discerning a vocation, for those struggling with those first years with that first child, screaming in church. And God bless them all. I say, let them scream. See? That is what they call full and active participation. We pray for priests, too, consecrated religious, that all of us, and single folks, that all of us in our vocations can remember first and foremost we are created in the image and likeness of God. And that in our vocation we are called to unfold that creative power of God's love in our world. Let us ask him to bless us. Let us ask him to fill us with his life. Let us ask him to keep us faithful, always and everywhere, to the fullness of that love, the fullness of that mercy, the fullness of that truth.